So, citizens, let us not remain for aye in solitude, our souls estranged from our brothers and sisters. Let us stop here by the river to enjoy, but also to inquire, to feast our eyes, but also to engage in sweet converse and even in debate, agreeing or dissenting, sweet alike, when wisdom and not victory the end. Brothers, sisters, young and old. In my youth, imagination bodied forth the immortal sages of Athens, my peripatetic ancestors, as I walked on London's leafy fringes. And so now, you are able to see, to hear, to walk with me, letting these fields, these hedgerows, this river, this simple turf become your academus, your rustic theater. Yes, nature, yes, to my enthusiast eye, thy universal green, thy matin dews, thy midday blush, all enchant, and in my glowing breast rouse from long slumber joy's ecstatic train. Yet, citizens, sweet as it is, neither vernal sky, nor blushing dawn, nor linnet warbling, nor soaring lark, no, nor prospects from the swelling height, not all the pleasures of the ravished sight, like friendly converse, wake the raptured glow. So, citizens, let us not remain for aye in solitude, our souls estranged from our brothers and sisters. Let us stop here by the river to enjoy, but also to inquire, to feast our eyes, but also to engage in sweet converse and even in debate, agreeing or dissenting, sweet alike, when wisdom and not victory the end. The excursion which we take today is an example of my peripatetic art, an art of walking while thinking and talking. Hand in a hand with our passion for the picturesque and romantic, let us bring hearts throbbing with anxiety for the welfare of the human race, and every fact connected with the history and actual condition of the laborious classes. And my friends, think, how do you define those laborious classes? Do you count yourselves among them? Do your leaders respond to and respect the work that your fellow citizens do? And are your leaders known for the work that they do? These are things that I wish you to think about as we are continuing on our journey today. Even you, my son, the smallest among us, have thoughts and dreams that they can teach us a great deal. Now, I realize many years have passed since I was here on this spot. much has changed for the better. There has been much progress to right the wrongs that I battled. The suffrage that I championed then is now, I understand, truly universal. Not only the rights of man, but the rights of women for which my friend Mary Wollstonecraft fought, have spread through the globe. All are citizens of the world, all races, all religions, as I and my friends so long ago foresaw. But humanity, we must be vigilant. We cannot take progress for granted. Time runs backwards as well as forward, as I believe some of you may recognize. Tyranny, injustice, and inequality, have these things been banished from your world? No, I believe they have not. The prejudices that bind and blind us yet remain in this year of 2019 as they did in the year 1805. We still fail to act and act upon the sympathy of heart and mind, that social equality and reciprocal love that ought to unite us as members of the human family. I tell you, my friends, the root of all evil is love of self. And I understand that you, in this year of 2019, have a diabolical invention called the selfie. I think that is something I'm very glad to see nobody here is engaging in that pursuit. But I think that is a symbol of the triumph of self over other, of image over voice, and acts of communication that ought to bring us together and bridge our differences. And speaking of bridges, and also things diabolical, we are, of course, at Devil's Bridge. And you probably have heard the stories of Devil's Bridge. Stories of an old woman outwitting the devil. Again, I ask you to think about what devils mean by you. Who do we call devils and why? Whom do we demonize? Do we demonize the poor? Immigrants? Those who do not look like us or believe as we do? Is it devilish to inquire, to question, to transgress convention? My friends, I have been called a devil for doing no more than daring to love humankind and teach them their rights. And so I am proud to take the name of devil, if that is what it means to be a devil. Like my friend William Blake, I know that poets are of the devil's party. And he wrote that in a poem called The Marriage of Heaven and Hell, in which he recognized that angels become devils, or those whom we call angels can be devils, and those whom we call devils can in fact be angels. Without contraries is no progression, he said. Opposition is true friendship. And so that bridge that we just saw is for me a symbol of that Blakean marriage of opposites. We need to bridge our differences. We need to speak from opposite points of view and cross back and forth always, in many ways, from one side to the other. I may be called not only a devil, but what some have called a lunatic for speaking of such things. However, what is the name of the river that we now stand beside? I leave you with that. Now, let me turn on to talk a bit about the poem that I am about to read to you. The story of my residence here in the Lake District for 18 months, living in Kendal, 1804 to 5. How I came here, my ill-fated friendships, the downfall of my hopes, the betrayal of my fame, all summed up in the true tale of a carriage accident. My friends, I am a Londoner, born and bred, in the heart of Covent Garden, and it was there that I made my fame as a champion of human rights. But from my earliest days, I was also a poet and a peripatetic lover of nature. So after I was forced out of London by gagging acts, and after my peaceful lectures on Roman history were attacked by mobs and press gangs with clubs and brickbats, I gladly welcomed the invitation of my poetical friend Samuel Taylor Coleridge to join his nest of disaffected radicals in Somerset, a literary and political triumvirate where we passed sentence on the productions and characters of the age, burst forth in poetical flights of enthusiasm, and philosophized our minds into a state of tranquility that the leaders of nations will never know. However, Sam's will proved much less than his words worth. And so I retreated to a sequestered valley of the Wye River in Wales. I farmed, I produced my poems, chiefly written in retirement, and I raised my family in nature, taking special joy in my eldest, Maria, the apple of my eye, who bounded up the hills in her trousers and took health by storm. But my joy was not to last, for I could not escape persecution and betrayal by the government, by my neighbors, and even, my friends, even by nature. When the treasure of my heart was cut down by an invisible enemy, the croup, at the very turn of a new century, having just completed her 7th year, I almost succumbed to grief. But my family needed me. I still had 4 more babes, and my science was at stake. So I ventured forth, newly reinvented, opening a new front in my battle for practical fluency and the rights of men by giving lectures on elocution and treating speech impediments. And at this time I renewed my friendship with my old friends, Mr. Wordsworth and Mr. Coleridge, and decided I would join them in the Lake District. While I continued my itinerant lectures, I settled my family in Kendal, where I found a very hearty reception in that dissenting town full of progressive thinkers. And I also found disciples among my old friends, disciples to my philosophical principles, which we shared. And confident in their support, I ventured forth to Scotland to champion the Romantic Revolution in poetic taste and public literacy on their behalf. For, you know, their lyrical ballads had been savaged as viciously as my poems had been by critics who called them dangerously revolutionary and leveling. That was Francis Jeffrey and his cronies in Edinburgh, the Edinburgh Review. Well, I jeffed him, I'll tell you. That was a memorable battle, a fierce exchange of lies and laughter. But I triumphed, and I returned to Kendal newly energized and conceived a new project of poems chiefly suggested by the scenery of nature. And I produced a fine, fair copied draft on the Muses. But once again, my hopes were disappointed, my friends. Not this time by Coleridge, who was away on a diplomatic mission to Malta and caught up in a love affair, tragic love affair, both with opium and with Wordsworth's sister-in-law. But I was disappointed by Wordsworth. Mr. Wordsworth, William had promised me many hours of sweet poetic converse. But when it came to it, he was always making excuses. He had found new friends, more genteel friends, may I add. And he did not do to be seen with an old Jacobin reprobate and showman like myself. By the summer of 1805, I had seen the writing on the wall, so to speak, to use that old joke that on my name that Samuel had used in a sonnet he wrote for me several years before. And so I wrote out my sad story in a poem I'm about to read to you after I'd had that unfortunate accident on the road back from Devil's Bridge, and an excursion arranged by another, more congenial perhaps, old friend, Dr. Peter Crompton from Liverpool. I may have had my Pegasus wings clipped that day, but I realized that men of science offered a better future than lukewarm bards. So halloo, if a feast is the wish, let Westmoreland furnish the Cockneys a dish. A wight late there was of amphibious nature, as Butler's old rat that for land was, or water. Half orator he, if the world would but know it, and had he for the wit for it, full halfway a poet. Half critic also, old, the measure is full, how many halves more? Irish half at a bull. So having procured him a license for need, no more interruptions, but let us proceed. Half student, half gallant, half busy, half idle, half wanting a spur and half wanting the bridle, half given to the devil, half revered as the chosen. In short, of his halves I could count up a dozen. This wight had a hackney, of hackneys the glory, predestined to shine in poetical story, half bred for the cart, half bred for the saddle, who had served half his life for a soldier to straddle, till drums from the regiment with but a half a hoof on, the chariot he dragged that our wight sat aloof on. This chariot, for so must in verse be its name, sirs, buggy, whiskey, or gig, every muse would disclaim, sirs. But however you call it, it must be confessed that it was but a half sort of thing at the best. And give it one wheel in place of half two, it might serve Mr. Punch as a coach for his shrew. Yet our poet loquacious, our orator bard, held both chariot and hack in transcendent regard. And if his vagaries your fancy could follow, right Pegasus this, that the car of Apollo, which through castles in air halfway over the nation had borne him in raptures of high inspiration. From Vega to Mersey, from Humber to Tweed, how his oracles thundered, how bounded his steed. Now spurning the Solway from Forth to the Clyde, over Scotland and Scotchmen his hobby must ride. Fame shouted before, envy growled at his heels, while critics were crushed by his merciless wheels. At length, with these visions of glory content, to loiter he came on the banks of the Kent, where, to kill the blue devils and banish the vapors, he'd fain with the lasses be cutting his capers. And Kent's pleasant vale has fair damsels enow, with eyes that are sable and eyes that are blue. A joke-loving doctor, agog for diversion, in his way from the lakes had devised an excursion, impatient to view the famed bridge that the devil to build o'er the Loon in past times was so civil, where still grander wonders had drawn folks to gape on, if the weight of the stones had not torn Satan's apron. But the travelers were many, the carriages few, so 3 must be crammed where was room but for 2. The coach was twice loaded that went on before, but Pegasus thought he was loaded much more. And if jamming make marvel, good people might gaze at our Phaeton's car as at Gilpin's post-chaise. But the lasses were canty, the driver was happy, and he ranted and sang like a man that's half nappy. Though faith, if it had so befallen him, between us it was not with Bacchus's gift, but with Venus's, who, knowing full well where his weakness most lies, had poured beauty's draughts through his too thirsty eyes. Ah, luckless inebriate, with vain visions burning, with car triple laden, as homeward returning, his Joan in the corner, his goddess beside him. The demon of mischief askance crossly eyed him, and vowed his high raptures full shortly to check, and so break down his pride, if not break short his neck. And now as both arms Demosthenean extending, the weight all before and the road all descending, forgetful, alas, of his critical station, the orator spouted a dashing oration. Poor Pegasus' back was right broken in twain, and down came car, courser, and riders amain. Alas, what a scene was there here for describing, if it were not high time to be done with my jibing. Well, here lay a splinter, and there lay a lady, and there lay an orator, silent as may be. Spikes, shafts, bonnets, traces, all in confusion, and knees, rumps, and elbows in woeful contusion. But kind Aesculapius was ready at need. The riders he healed and gave hopes for the steed. But farewell, alas, to the car of Apollo. His calling on foot must our orator follow. For wheelwrights and coachwrights all make their excuses, and will not accept of his drafts on the muses. Citizens, I hope you enjoyed our riverside walk, engaged in true peripatetic converse about the beauties of nature, but also not forgetting historical and social awareness. This walk, my friends, has changed radically since I was here more than 200 years ago. The river has changed its course. There is a lesson in that. There are lessons, of course, all around us. I hold that no man is an island, no, nor women either. But there is an island there now, and that island was not there in my time. In my time, the walk we have just taken, or that some of us perhaps may be about to take, was part of the mainland. And the route that is so green and pastoral now was in 1805 the site of many works that made use of the river, mills, tanneries and such, places not of beauty, but places closer to what my friend William Blake, of whom I spoke a few minutes ago, called dark satanic mills. But you remember what I said about Satan, devils, demons, and how they are often, that term is used in a narrow way, and we must think about our use of such terms. So I wish to remind you that these places of industry, they may not have been places of beauty, but they could be places of ingenuity and benefit to society, especially if the rights and conditions of the workers are taken account of. Because, my friends, this is, I'm sure, today true as it was in my day. All the factories are in effect political societies where the workers come together. And while they may not have a Socrates in their midst, they each had a Socratic spirit. Each man brought to the table his little mite, his little part of knowledge, and by sharing it together in a cooperative fashion, they all enlarged their stock of knowledge and circulation and brought it together and improved the whole. So as long as the conditions of workers are given thought to, factories need not be ugly, depressing things. And I want you to think as well, citizens, because you remember I told you that walking is for enjoying the beauties of nature, but also for inquiring, speaking to one another, and thinking. The walk you have just taken is full of beauty, and all those signs of working class ugliness have been removed, but has the change been entirely for the better? I wonder if you thought about those luxurious homes that we just passed, where the old factories have been transformed into beautiful places to live, that I believe are called holiday lets these days. Can the workers afford those holiday lets? And if they cannot, if the people who work in a place do not have comfortable homes to live, is that a good thing to transform the old buildings into beautiful places to live? Who gets to enjoy the pleasures of those? Think. You must think about such things. I do not tell you what to think. I do not want you to follow me as some person of authority, but I do, citizens, demand that you think about such questions. This is the true peripatetic mode of landscape appreciation, of social inquiry. And we will have further chances to practice it this afternoon. So, you may join us for that later on. However, for the moment, I wish to pause here and talk a little bit more about the history of Kirkby Lonsdale. The sign that you see right there is called Radical Steps. And that is as good a place as any to introduce you to some of the other radical devils that are associated with Kirkby Lonsdale. Mind you, the steps were not here when I was. And the man who built them, Francis Pearson, was at that time but a boy, about the age of my son, John Hampton. But already he was showing promise of the silver-tongued lawyer he became. I like to think that he followed the example of the little lessons in elocution that I gave. His father was a man by the same name, Francis Pearson, Dr. Francis Pearson, Old Frank as he was known. And he was a man after my own heart, like Dr. Crompton. Like Peter Crompton, like me, and like most men of science and reason, Dr. Pearson was naturally inclined towards free thinking and reform. But he was canny enough to avoid controversy, as of course a doctor must be in order to keep and serve patients of all stripes and patients of all belief. But I know that Dr. Frank Pearson shared my opinion of the established church when he came here in 1780. And this shows in his clever method of getting those patients. More often than not of a Sunday, he would have his servant come into the church in the middle of a service and whisper to him. And old Frank would gasp and show a look of worry as he hastened out and galloped away so that everybody in the congregation would think, oh, he must be well thought of. He's always being called away. He is so much in demand, I must try him myself. And in that way, Dr. Pearson got many, many patients. But not only did he gain patients, he also freed himself from listening to the vicar's drone, that clerical drawl and cathedral chaunt. No wonder people slept in church. They paid too much attention to the glory of God and not enough attention to the voice of God. And as I always said, the voice of God is the voice of the people. Or put it the other way around, the voice of the people is the voice of God. Now, Dr. Old Frank's free-thinking attitude was transferred to his three sons. I hear they were all eccentric, living as they did by the Loon River. The eldest, John, was quite a character. He never married. He took up living in an old castle where he sat on a throne. He had very few servants, however. He took joy in doing all the work himself, wearing the clothes of the different servants as he did so. He also, whenever he would go for a visit, he took his own feather bed with him because he was never satisfied with the beds in the places that he visited. Some of us have perhaps had the same experience when we go and stay in other places. The middle son of old Frank Pearson Alexander followed his father into medicine and became a surgeon, and a very good one. He made his name for himself in another carriage accident, not far from here, but a much more grievous one than the one that I had. The horses of the mail coach bolted and the coach overturned. And Dr. Alexander Pearson saved the life of one of the passengers by removing a piece of the man's skull in order to release pressure in the brain. I believe that operation is called trepanning, and he was the first in this area to ever carry out that operation. But the best known of the Pearson sons was the youngest, Francis, named after his father, and the builder of these radical steps. He was a lawyer and a notorious radical in the 1830s and 40s, known as the Kirkby Devil. Why was he named the Kirkby Devil? Well, people, when they were in trouble, such trouble that it would take the devil himself to extract them, they would call on Francis Pearson, the lawyer, and with his silver tongue and his clever courtroom tactics, he would be sure to get them off. He even got off the Killington witch, who was seen playing cards with the devil at the crossroads. This was a place of great superstition in those days. I say nothing of what it is today. I cannot speak on that. But Francis Pearson, the Kirkby Devil, had a devilish wit too. He was a man of humor and repartee. Like me, he was able to laugh at himself, but also able to turn the tables on his attackers and outwit them. He was a true devil's advocate, was Francis Pearson the Younger. But he was a good man. He was a man of heart, a man of character, as well as a judge of other people's characters. He would take no fees if there was a poor man who needed his services and who truly was worth working for. And of course, he would take plentiful pleas from the rich man who came to, and he would make sure he would get them off, but only with good payment. His lovely wife, Maria, the same name as my dear darling, now gone, was his childhood sweetheart. They married in 1823, not long after setting up his attorney's practice. I like to think he might have been my son, and perhaps my heir, as unfortunately my own heir, Algernon Sidney, who so betrayed me. But I will not speak of that, my friends. Francis Pearson, one thing we did not have in common. As the poem you have just heard will tell you, I was never very good with horses. As Coleridge used to say, I never was an hypocrite, never a good judge of horses, hypocrite. But Frank Pearson was. He kept a stable full of very good horses, very fast horses. He thought nothing whatsoever of jumping on a horse and going 100 miles to the sessions in York, to the sessions in Carlisle, and as if it was like going to lunch. No trouble at all with his horses. So citizens, leaving tales of devilry aside, let us now pause to take in the famous view and share some later stories about the history of Kirkby Lonsdale, which highlight another aspect of my polymathic identity and peripatetic pursuits. For I was an artist too, although not a very skilled one. You may see some of my drawings if you come to the Jerwood Centre this afternoon. But this was a famous prospect even in my time. It was sketched by William Mallord Turner, the great English artist, in 1816 from the summer house of the church that you can see there. And it was called in its time Turner's View. Now it is called Ruskin's View. This was after my time. Again, I tell you, I am 255 years old. But Ruskin was another man after my own heart. And he, in many ways, carried the legacy of my peripatetic attitude towards nature. you will know John Ruskin as a famous Victorian art critic who championed the painter William Turner. And Ruskin wrote, as you will see on the placard here, and I quote in full from Ruskin, "The Valley of the Loon at Kirkby is one of the loveliest scenes in England, and therefore in the world. Whatever moorland hill and sweet river and English forest foliage can be seen at their best is gathered there, and chiefly seen from the steep bank which falls to the stream side from the upper part of the town itself. I do not know in all my country, still less in France or Italy, a place more naturally divine or a more priceless possession of a true holy land." Perhaps a trifle exaggerated, perhaps even a trifle imperialist, one might say. Especially if, as in many of the heritage plaques, it is taken out of context. Put in its proper context, it is more nuanced, and it resonates with my peripatetic in the way it addresses what you might call tourism and heritage industries. Now, there is no direct connection between myself and Mr. Ruskin. He was born exactly 200 years ago in 1819. So he was but a babe during my time of life. But I can see from my perspective now that he inherited and practiced my characteristically romantic radical mix of polymathic eccentricity, self-education, reform, and proto-socialist politics, combining labor, landscape, and aesthetics. Because this text that I just read to you and that you will find on this heritage plaque is actually from Forrest Clavigera, his 1871 series of letters written to workers of England, in which he advocated Christian socialism, attacked the established church, and also attacked the ugliness of Victorian mass culture and tourism. In Forrest Clavigera, that passage about this wonderful and truly divine view is part of a larger argument that is perhaps less complimentary to the town of Kirkby Lonsdale, but is far more interesting, providing a devil's bridge to today, where we see socialism in crisis along with the environment in crisis in relation to climate change and environmental degradation. For this quotation is actually the introduction to a much larger attack on the pollution of the Loon River and the pollution of minds by a culture that pays more attention to superficial, conventional, pre-packaged prospects of nature and ignores what lies beneath them, the waste and the ugliness that very attitude of conventional nature worship creates and then covers over. Because Mr. Ruskin notes in that text from which that passage about the divine view is taken, that the path to this viewpoint in 1871 is neatly bounded with sharpened iron railings designed to impale. You may have seen some of them. They'd fallen over as we came up those steps, the sharp railings. They were designed to impale people, he said, and to direct both the feet and the eyes like cattle to narrowly approved sites that are considered scenic prospects, while ignoring what was on the other side of the fence. At that time, as he put it, garbage tipped over the edge, so the whole blessed shore underneath is one waste of filth, town drainage, broken saucepans, tannin, and mill refuse. The same was true, as he goes further in this passage, of other nearby bridges and rivers. He talks a great deal about the Wharf River at Bolton Abbey. Some of you may know that area not far from here, where he says dunghills and dust heaps adjacent to schools, and then that causes him to comment on failures of social institutions, and interestingly enough, the failure of the education of girls, which was a particular interest of mine as well, and how girls are constrained by fashion and propriety that prevent them from scrambling and bounding freely in nature. And indeed, Mr. Ruskin's memory of his Scotch cousin Jessie, 8 years old, and his Croydon cousin Bridget, a slim girl of 14, all wading together with their petticoats hiked up in defiance of convention, in defiance of the old people who tried to tell them how to behave. That passage reminds me of my dear Maria, who I dressed in trousers so that she could bound freely in nature and have the same advantages as the boys. Mr. Ruskin even brings in the devil and a little taste of my seditious allegory with his description of the benches that used to be here, which have iron legs in a serpentine design looking like, quote, the devil's tail pulled off with a goose's head stuck on the wrong end. And this, for Mr. Ruskin, becomes a symbol of our English populace, which seats itself to admire prospects, and the goose-headed serpent consciousness that governs the country. Quote, with all this cost, filth, time, and misery you at last produce the devil's tail for your sustenance. I leave it to you to decide who the goose-headed serpent is in your own government and your own time. I make no comments.